Welcome to the debate. When we look back at the construction of the great cathedrals of Europe, there's this inherent duality that we usually overlook. On one hand, you have this profound, almost incomprehensible mythic vision.
Right, the desire to reach the heavens.
Exactly. Driven entirely by belief. But, a cathedral doesn't stand up just because of faith. It stands up because of brutal, uncompromising physics and, the exact geometry of stone masonry.
Yeah, if you have the math without the belief, nobody actually funds the building.
Right. But if you have the belief without the math, the roof collapses. So today we are examining a venture that sits exactly at that intersection. It's called the Aeronomics Unicorn Brief.
And brief might be a massive understatement here. What we are looking at is a 25-year grounding plan. The source documents map out the architecture to build what they are calling a virtual unicorn.
Which is a fascinating concept.
It is, but it proposes merging ancient Brehon wisdom, Celtic identity, and mutual exchange with, highly structured B2B corporate services and AI agent orchestration.
And our debate today emerges directly from those business model documents. They outline the financial models, the adoption ceilings, everything required to reach a €1 billion valuation over the next 2 decades. Now, from my perspective as someone who focuses on visionary building, I see a deeply plausible civilizational scale operating system.
A civilizational operating system.
Yes, because AI radically compresses the need for human labor. So Aeronomics allows a microscopic core team to leverage a huge cultural moat into massive scale.
Well, I look at the exact same documents, but I come at it from a strictly traditional investor perspective. I will acknowledge that their model, especially this idea of a 70% operating surplus, looks incredibly beautiful on a spreadsheet.
It really does.
But the reality of translating this vague, spiritual language into actual execution discipline, it presents extreme and frankly likely insurmountable operational friction. The concrete cash flows and the B2B adoption required are staggering.
Well, let's break down how they actually plan to do this. The architecture itself is what makes it unique. The source material outlines Aeronomics as a layered institution containing 3 distinct interoperable stacks. First, you have the mythic, or identity layer.
Okay.
This is rooted in the Tuatha De Danann cosmology, the ancient annals. It's the profound reason people feel called to this, rather than just being, marketed to.
I have to stop you right there. Because if I'm a listener or an enterprise software buyer, I'm already raising an eyebrow. Tuatha De Danann? We're talking about the ancient supernatural race of gods in Irish mythology, right?
Yes.
How on earth does an ancient Celtic myth layer onto modern corporate services?
It's a fair question, and it's exactly where most people get tripped up. The cosmology acts as the philosophical bedrock. It's about a deep, indigenous understanding of balance, land, and community. So that's the first stack. The second stack is the Kaman, or the circles layer.
Right, the community layer.
Yeah. This is the practical social fabric, local guides, mutual exchange, people actually gathering and supporting each other.
Got it.
And finally, the third stack is the bankable layer. This is the masonry, the corporate services, the legal compliance, the actual vehicles that sign contracts and manage cash flows. Now, the reason this virtual unicorn concept isn't just mystical hype anymore is entirely due to technology.
You mean the AI leverage?
Exactly. The plan cites Stanford's 2025 AI Index data, which explicitly shows AI inference costs falling 280-fold.
Which is a massive deflationary force on operational costs? Sure.
Right. Because of that AI leverage, this model projects needing only 273 paid staff by the year 2050. Let that sink in. 273 people coordinating a global network of millions.
It's an incredibly low human core.
It creates an unparalleled low-cost scaling advantage to capture that 80 million person diaspora.
That's a compelling argument on the cost side, I'll give you that. But you can't just have low costs, you need revenue. And as an investor, I aggressively pivot to the hard metrics of that revenue. The projections in this plan rely extraordinarily heavily on what they call the cohesion fee.
The B2B offering.
Right. They are planning to charge corporate clients €4 and 44 cents per employee per day across 220 working days.
Yeah, it adds up quickly.
It does. In their base case, they project reaching over 488 million euros annually from this cohesion product alone by 2050. Even in their conservative 33% scenario, they're projecting 161 million euros annually.
It's a highly ambitious target.
To a Fortune 500 procurement officer, you have to sell a measurable utility. My primary concern here is the massive risk of what I'd call spiritual inflation without execution.
Meaning what exactly?
Meaning the founder of this project has to manage ancient cosmology on one side and enterprise SaaS procurement on the other. That kind of founder overextension makes this fundamentally unsuited to the predictable scaling logic you need for a billion-euro recurring revenue valuation.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective on how that execution actually unfolds. Let's put ourselves in the shoes of the founder for the immediate operational reality, what the plan calls the proof of one stack phase, spanning 2026 to 2027.
Ah, yes, the crucible years.
Exactly. The core goal here is transaction legibility. How do you take that civilizational cosmology we just talked about and turn it into a repeatable product system? They do it by standardizing the offerings into a single digital dashboard.
And that is precisely where I see the friction. I mean, look at what they are trying to cram into this dashboard. You've got €7 a month DAGDA memberships for individuals. You've got €20 a month SME trade debt settlements for local businesses. And then you have this massive cohesion product for corporate HR, all sitting right next to public grant administration.
You think it's too scattered?
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that it will be a seamless transition. How exactly do concepts like restorative practice and mutual exchange get packaged into a piece of software without just, dissolving into pure poetry?
Well,
Or, on the flip side, without becoming so administratively complex that it alienates both the spiritual seeker and the corporate client.
let's pause, because I know what the listener is thinking right now. It sounds like a total pipe dream. How do you take a spiritual, community-based ritual and sell it to a chief human resources officer?
Exactly my point.
But this is exactly where the AI content engine and the Brehon School Guide training come into play. The cultural transmission doesn't remain abstract poetry. It gets converted into structured, executable intellectual property.
Walk me through how that actually works, though. What is the mechanism?
Think about a standard fiat currency system. Let's build this analogy together. The bankable layer of aeronomics, the corporate contracts, the dashboard, that's like the physical paper money and the banking infrastructure. The ATMs, the clearing houses.
Okay. And the common layer, the community circles, that would be the actual physical economy. People trading goods and services in the real world using that paper money.
Exactly. But what is the mythic layer? It's the shared societal belief that gives that piece of paper any actual value. It's the belief in the sovereign. If the population stops believing in the government, the paper becomes completely worthless, no matter how good the ATMs are.
Right. Runaway inflation. The collapse of trust.
Right. Without the myth, the system is empty. But without the bankable layer, the ATMs and the paper, the myth is just an abstract economic theory. You can't buy groceries with a theory. So what Eronomics does is use generative AI as the mint.
The mint.
Yes, the AI takes the mythic IP, the ancient Brehon legal codes of restorative justice, the cosmology, and stamps it into repeatable, structured protocols. So when a certified Brehon guide walks into a corporate conflict resolution meeting, they aren't just improvising poetry. They are running a highly structured, AI-optimized workflow that is rooted in a deep, indigenous framework of trust.
It's a clever analogy, and it does highlight why the three layers have to exist together. But let's stress test this mint of yours. Let's look at the cohesion engine again. We've established what the product theoretically is, but who is actually paying for it?
The corporate clients.
Yes, but the assumption is that they can acquire 2,000 corporate accounts covering 500,000 employees. We're talking about charging nearly €977 per employee per year.
It's a premium product.
What makes this defensible against traditional corporate HR platforms or massive enterprise software incumbents who already have the ear of the CHRO? Why buy Celtic-rooted cohesion when you can just buy a standard management consulting SaaS tool?
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because it assumes Aeronomics is competing in the traditional HR SaaS category. They aren't, and the source material explicitly counters this. Look at the data they cite from PwC's 2025 AI Jobs Barometer.
Which tracks the economic dividends of AI adoption.
Right. And what the PwC data finds is that the growth dividends of AI don't just depend on buying better software. They depend on organizational trust, clear governance, and team cohesion.
Okay, I see where you're going.
We are entering an era where AI is automating the heavy lifting of tasks. The bottleneck for a company's growth is no longer productivity, it's human trust and alignment. Traditional HR software is transactional, Aeronomics is relational.
So you're saying they are selling the trust layer that makes the AI transition actually work.
Exactly. The mythic layer provides a profound, distinct vocabulary for trust that a standard corporate consulting firm simply cannot replicate. You can't fake a 1,000-year-old cultural lineage. It is category creation, not competition.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently. Category creation is notoriously expensive and incredibly slow. Educating a market that they need Brehon-rooted organizational cohesion to unlock their AI dividend, that requires incredibly long sales cycles, and this brings us to the most vulnerable part of the entire financial architecture.
The early funding gap.
Yes. If the revenue builds as slowly as category creation usually dictates, how does this venture survive 2027 and 2028 without dilutive venture capital funding?
Which they explicitly reject, by the way, because traditional VC logic mandates a loss of control, an aggressive exit timeline, and that ruins the mythic layer entirely. You can't IPO a civilizational operating system without corrupting it.
Exactly. So instead, the plan relies on early funding alternatives. I look at the balance sheet for 2027, and I see a heavy dependence on a 6.9 million euro donor liquidity facility, alongside massive reliance on EU grants.
They plan to leverage Erasmus+, the Citizens, Equality, Rights and Values Program, and Peace Plus funding streams.
And from a strictly Heilig investor perspective, that is a massive red flag. It looks less like a high-margin tech startup and more like an NGO grant hustle masquerading as a unicorn.
A grant hustle?
Yes, relying on the political whims of European funding cycles and a one-off donor facility to survive the productization phase, that is a structural vulnerability. If those grants don't materialize exactly on schedule, the entire compounding math of the next 2 decades falls apart.
That is a very valid concern. If the bridge capital fails, the project starves. But let's look at how the balance sheet is fundamentally structured to absorb that risk over time. You have to look at the capital efficiency of the design.
You're talking about the 70% surplus?
Yes. The model is asset-light and debt-free. Because the AI-heavy design keeps the cost of sales firmly at 30%, they are generating a massive operating surplus. But the genius of the model is what they do with that 70%. They don't burn it on bloated marketing campaigns or massive physical real estate footprints. They park it into a compounding reserve, earning a modest 5% interest.
What the source material calls civilizational ballast.
Civilizational ballast. I just love that term.
I have analyzed that reserve model deeply, and mathematically, the compounding logic is sound, based on their assumptions. But the execution discipline required to just park 70% of your surplus and not touch it, that is almost unheard of in modern venture building. Founders always want to spend the cash to accelerate growth.
But if they hold that discipline, the numbers become undeniable. Let's walk through the math. By the 2040s, this reserve begins generating investment income that outgrows the payroll drag entirely. In their 33% scenario, which, remember, means they miss their base target by a massive margin, the reserve still hits 4.2 billion euros.
Wow.
In the base case, it hits an astonishing 13.3 billion euros.
At 5% interest, a 4 billion euro reserve generates 200 million a year just in yield.
Exactly. Which pays for the 273 staff 10 times over. This isn't just a cash pile. It's an endowment. It's designed to ensure the network outlives the founder and becomes a permanent piece of civic infrastructure.
Right.
So when you call the EU grants a hustle, I think you're misreading the strategy.
The grants are non-dilutive bridge capital. They use the public money to fund the Brehon school and the cultural transmission, which aligns perfectly with the public benefit mandates of Erasmus+, while giving the commercial cohesion engine time to mature in the background. They are matching the exact right type of capital to the exact right layer of the stack.
I will concede that the mathematical architecture of the reserve is exceptionally strong. If, and it is a massive if, you can truly keep the core headcount to 273 people while serving tens of millions of users through AI and decentralized guide circles, the margins are spectacular. But my skepticism always returns to the human element.
Where do you see the breakdown?
The final arc of the plan, from 2043 to 2050. At this point, the network has expanded far beyond Ireland. It's across the Celtic Crescent, Scotland, Wales, Brittany, and reaching into that 80 million strong global diaspora.
Right, the scaling phase.
But the scaling relies on local self-governing cells, the Kumon layer, holding the grammar, the ethics, and the rituals without losing the original signal. The risk of governance drift here is monumental.
It is a challenge, yeah.
Maintaining the rigorous compliance of the bankable layer alongside the purity of the mythic identity across millions of people is a tightrope walk. Cultural resistance, internal schisms over how to interpret the annals, or a simple bureaucratic bloat could easily derail that 70% margin assumption.
I don't disagree that governance drift is the ultimate boss-level challenge of this entire venture. How do you scale a culture without diluting it? But the Aeronomics plan actually anticipates this. If you look at the timeline, the 2031 to 2035 phase is completely dedicated to this problem. They don't focus on new inventions during those years. They focus entirely on governance, quality control, guide certification, and data architecture.
How does data architecture prevent cultural schisms, though?
Because they are codifying the teachings into structured AI workflows. It creates a form of digital immutability. The AI doesn't just cut administrative costs, it acts as an anchor for fidelity. The local guide in Boston or Sydney isn't just making up their own version of Brehon law. They're interacting with an AI agent that holds the pristine, original logic of the central network. The AI guards against the degradation of the signal.
It is a profound test of whether technology can preserve cultural fidelity rather than erode it. We are so used to technology atomizing culture and destroying local nuance. Using it to enforce and preserve a deep cultural connective tissue is a fascinating inversion of the standard Silicon Valley model.
It's the core thesis of the whole project.
But looking at the entirety of the timeline, from the proof of one stack in 2026 to the legacy phase in 2050, the make or break moment is obvious. It's that productization and codification arc from 2028 to 2030. If the founder and the early team cannot translate the cosmology into strict, legible B2B and consumer products during that specific window, the bridge grants will run out before the corporate cohesion revenue reaches escape velocity.
I think we have found a point of strong convergence there. The 2028 to 2030 window truly is the crucible for Aeronomics. If they successfully navigate that phase, if they can actually use generative AI to turn ancient Brehon wisdom into a daily, measurable utility for SMEs and corporate workforces, they won't just have built a company.
No, they'll have built something else entirely.
They will have created an entirely new category of enterprise. By keeping the mythic, human, and bankable layers distinct but totally interoperable, Aeronomics presents a highly credible architecture for a new kind of civilizational node. It proves that you can build a massive, highly profitable economic engine with very few paid staff, completely outside the venture capital system, without losing your soul.
And I will summarize my position by reiterating that while this financial model is exceptionally capital efficient, it demands a level of flawless execution that is rarely, if ever, seen in the wild. The B2B sales motion for the cohesion engine remains a massive friction point, and the reliance on early donor liquidity and grant timing is a deep structural risk.
Fair enough?
It is a beautiful spreadsheet, but the sheer complexity of maintaining rigorous B2B compliance while simultaneously fostering a genuine, uncorrupted mythic identity remains a monumental task. Capital here truly is in service to manifestation, not control. And because of that, it requires a very specific type of visionary backer
an impact steward, or a regenerative family office, not a traditional venture capitalist.
It really forces us to reconsider how we measure value, scale, and institutional longevity in an age where AI can do all the heavy lifting of bureaucracy. We started today talking about the construction of cathedrals, the absolute necessity of marrying the divine blueprint with the brutal, grounded math of stone and gravity.
The myth and the masonry.
Exactly. The Aeronomics Unicorn Brief is attempting to lay the masonry for a digital cathedral that spans the global diaspora. Whether this represents the future of institution building or an impossibly complex utopia is something we are all going to watch unfold over the next quarter century. The source documents provide even deeper statistical models and scenario analyses for those wishing to explore the exact mechanisms of that 25-year arc. We'll leave it to you to decide if the masonry will hold.